Glad to see everybody. Thanks for coming out this evening. We're very excited about this upcoming program, and I'll be introducing Andy, Alec, and Sarah in just a moment, but let me let you know that the co-sponsors of tonight's event are the Nashua River Watershed Association, in particular our Climate Impact Committee, chaired by Bob Pine, and the National Park Service through the Nashua, Squanicook, and Nissitissit Wild and Scenic Rivers Stewardship Council. And Lucy Wallace is the chair of that Stewardship Council, and Emma Ward is the National Park Service liaison. I will share the two websites of those co-sponsoring organizations in a moment in the chat. Let me now share with you the introductions. Andy Finton is a conservation ecologist at the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts. He was project manager for the first BioMap in 2001, co-authored BioMap 2 in 2010, and co-led the development of the latest BioMap, which you'll be hearing about. Andy's work focuses on forest and landscape ecology and spatial assessments that identify conservation priorities. Andy works collaboratively with land trusts, public agencies, and academic partners to conserve the important landscapes across Massachusetts and New England. Alec Kaisand is the BioMap Outreach Specialist with MassWildlife. He provides user support for the newly enhanced BioMap conservation planning tool. Alec earned a BS in Environmental Conservation and Sustainability from the University of New Hampshire at Durham, as well as an MS in Conservation Biology and a GIS certificate from Antioch University, New England in Keene. He has experience conducting spatial analysis, data management, and GIS training for conservation commissions, land trusts, municipalities, nonprofits, and academics throughout New England. And finally, Sarah Wasserman is another BioMap outreach specialist with MassWildlife. She provides user support for this same tool, as does Alec. She earned a BS in Environmental Science from the University of Vermont Rubenstein School of the Environment. Her outreach and education experience ranges from her work with Vermont State Parks and with the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation to the trustees of reservations in her home state of Massachusetts. So with no further ado, I'll turn it over to Andy. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Al, and thanks everyone for joining this afternoon. We're excited to be here as well. As Al said, I'm Andy Finton with the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts. Alec and Sarah have done an outstanding job as outreach specialists, working with folks across the state at multiple scales to understand, interpret, and apply the new BioMap data and tools, which we're going to do here with you all today. This project, just like BioMap 2, if you're familiar with it, was a collaboration between MassWildlife and the Nature Conservancy. Eve Schluter, the Assistant Director for Natural Heritage at MassWildlife, and I co-led the project over the last 3 years, a lot of Zoom meetings, and released the product just last November. Eve couldn't join us today, but I personally believe there's a ton of power in the new BioMap to create unified vision for effective conservation by multiple entities, all the way from full statewide agencies down to municipalities and everyone in between. For those familiar with BioMap 2, you'll see a lot of similarities with that product, but also a lot of new innovations. Sarah and Alec are going to do the heavy lifting today and give a great summary of the project, the tools, and the data. And then we can all have a discussion and answer your questions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah and Alec.
Thanks, Andy, and thank you again for inviting us to speak today. So as Andy summarized there, we're going to go through a few things today, starting with just background information on the new BioMap, a brief moment to answer any questions just on the content of that. Then we can go through the new website and interactive mapper and demonstrate how to utilize that. And then we can open up for more questions and discussions. So that's our agenda for today, and we'll get started with some of the slides. So as many of you know, I'm sure Massachusetts is really teeming with life. We have nearly 3 million acres of forest, 1,500 miles of coastline, and a vast networks of rivers and critical wetlands that are supporting this diverse natural ecosystems, which are providing habitat for a wide variety of plants and animals. And these natural systems really offer vital ecological benefits. They filter our air, they clean our water, and they provide food and economic opportunities, as well as mitigating the detrimental effects of climate change. And they provide us with recreational opportunities, all of which are enriching the quality of our lives. And the people of the Commonwealth have spent decades protecting these incredible natural resources to help ensure that life, plants, animals, and people can thrive. However, despite this significant progress and conservation successes, our biodiversity is at crisis at a global, national, and state scale. According to the National Wildlife Federation report from 2018, 1/3 of species in the US are vulnerable and 1 in 5 species are at high risk of extinction. In Massachusetts, we currently have 432 species on our endangered species list. Threats to our biodiversity in the state include things such as habitat loss and fragmentation, invasive species, and emerging diseases. And all of these are being compounded by climate change. And a recent UN climate report recognized the interdependence of climate, ecosystems, biodiversity, and human societies. And if we really want to reverse these trends, urgent action is needed. And that's why we're here today, to introduce you to BioMap, the future of conservation in Massachusetts. So as Andy mentioned, he's really been a part of all of these iterations, but for those who aren't familiar, Massachusetts really has a long history of being a leader with the development of these groundbreaking conservation tools. So BioMap was originally launched in 2001, Living Waters in 2003, and then BioMap 2 in 2010. And over the years, these products have provided a great framework for protection and stewardship of lands and waters critical for biodiversity conservation. It's been heavily utilized by land trusts, state agencies, municipalities, and others, and has been considered a trusted, incredible source of information. So as Andy mentioned, this BioMap is a result of the ongoing collaboration between MassWildlife and the Massachusetts chapter of the Nature Conservancy. And with similar missions and goals and science-based approaches to conservation, MassWildlife and the TNC are natural partners to produce and maintain BioMap moving forward. And with this latest iteration, we've gone even further, and we're excited to show you some of the new features today. So we see BioMap really as more than just a map. It is a map, it is a tool, and it is a vision for the people of the Commonwealth to come together to strategically protect, manage, and restore lands and waters that are most important for conserving biodiversity in Massachusetts now and into the future. For those that are familiar with BioMap 2, the conservation targets in BioMap are grouped into 2 main elements. We have the core habitat and critical natural landscapes, so you can see on the map here. The core habitat in the darker green identifies areas that are critical for long-term persistence of rare species and a wide diversity of resilient ecosystems. And critical natural landscapes in the light green identifies large landscapes and habitat buffers that enhance resiliency, maintain connectivity, and support ecological processes. Together, core and critical natural landscape make up 2.4 million acres in the state. And if you're familiar with the previous iterations, over 90% of BioMap 2 is included in this update. There is some shift in some areas within core and CNL. Some of BioMap 2 areas were removed due to things like new developments. There's also some new areas included in BioMap due to new data and new methodologies. Now, within core habitat and critical natural landscapes, there are components for each, and you can see them listed here. And so just to mention a few: rare species core, aquatic core, priority natural communities, landscape blocks, coastal adaptation, turn foraging habitats, and among others. And so being able to take a look at both the elements view and peeling back to the components can help us understand what's going on. So if we see here in the map, this is showing that elements view of core and critical natural landscapes. But what you can do in this interactive mapper is then switch it to these various components, and now we can see the different colors that are associated with those components and can get more information about those. And so we have updated the data layers with the latest information on species and habitat and enhanced some of the components such as aquatic core with new methodologies. And this iteration of BioMap also includes new local and regional components, which Sarah will introduce you to now.
Thanks, Alec, for starting us off. So one of the key innovations that we're excited about in this new biomap is the addition of local components or locally important habitats, which are relevant for municipal planning and action. Almost every town in the state has some level of core habitat or critical natural landscape, but our municipalities have very different patterns of developed and natural lands. So the amount of statewide habitat within them varies significantly. And where the goal with the local components is to add to each town's understanding of their important natural resources and thus inform municipal decisions. So we have some examples that illustrate this. This first example in this map, we're looking at landscape blocks, which are a component of critical natural landscape. Landscape blocks use ecological integrity data to identify large, intact mosaics of forest, wetland, and freshwater habitat. These areas support wide-ranging species like moose and black bear, and the resilience and abundance of many wildlife and plant species. And these, as we're looking at them now, are the data defined from a statewide perspective, meaning the largest blocks in each region of the state were selected. But as we can see in this map, landscape blocks are more abundant in some parts of the state than others, and many cities and towns in this area that we're looking at don't have any. So we added a local version of landscape blocks, which we are calling local landscapes, which now appear in the lighter green on this map. And these are the most intact landscapes in each city and town. So it's the same ecological integrity data as the statewide landscape blocks, but from the scale of each municipality, essentially going one town at a time. So as we can see by the addition of local landscapes, the local components make BioMap relevant and applicable for many more communities. For another example, we like this example with the town of Stoughton, which is kind of in the southwest metro area of Boston. And as we're looking at it from the statewide perspective, about 6% of Stoughton is identified as core habitat and critical natural landscape, as we can see in the dark and light green. And so these are the priorities from the statewide perspective. It's also worth noting that next to Stoughton, Avon is actually the only town in the state with no core habitat or critical natural landscape. But when we add in the local components, we can see what a difference it makes. Over 25% of Stoughton has habitat prioritized to inform municipal decisions. And so these areas include local rare species habitat, local landscapes, along with local wetlands and rivers and other components. And the idea behind the local components is not to replace the statewide ones, but to complement them and augment them. We can see similarly in Avon, how much the local components can really add to the picture when used with the statewide data. And as you can see, looking at this map, every town now has an understanding of the important habitats within their boundaries. Yeah, and just important to reiterate, that the local and statewide data should be used together as they are meant to complement each other. On the other end of the scale, we wanted to identify habitats that make a significant contribution to conservation at scales larger than Massachusetts. Especially those of you near the New Hampshire border know that plants and animals don't know Massachusetts from New Hampshire. So thinking broader than just the boundaries of the state here. For one example, a recent study showed that tree populations in the eastern United States are moving north and west in response to climate change at approximately 10 miles a decade. And tulip tree is a great example of this, which is a more southern species, but it's projected to shift its range significantly northward through Massachusetts. So BioMap now includes regional connectivity data that identifies places that support these large-scale range shifts. And while not pictured here, BioMap also identifies important habitats for rare species that are vulnerable at regional, national, or global scales. So just as a few examples in your area, I mean, the National River watershed is quite large, so I picked a few. But just to take a look at the BioMap data, the first one that we're looking at here is the Oxbow National Wildlife Refuge in the area where Lancaster meets Harvard. And with these areas, we can see aquatic and wetland cores that are overlapping, as well as a vernal pool core in that red, and nearly the entire area as rare species core in the pink. And then I also thought I'd highlight to the right this area, which is not within the refuge, but I think it's a great example of how much the local components can add to the picture and local connectivity. We see local landscapes towards the top in that light brown color, local aquatic habitats and local aquatic habitat buffers, as well as wetlands closer down towards the bottom of the map we have. So I thought this was a great one to start with. We have a lot going on. We can see how the local really adds to the picture. Another example just shows the J. Harry Rich State Forest up in Groton. And we can see here, oh, one moment, my mouse is migrating. There we go. We can see here local wetland habitats, as well as local landscapes and rare species core and aquatic core buffer. So we can really see how, in this case, the local and the statewide are pretty much overlapping, but they still really add and create a rich picture of what's going on in that area. And to highlight the impact of local data from the municipal perspective, I just zeroed in on one town here, which is Ashby. And you can see how the local components, in this case, it's local landscapes in the brown, local aquatic habitats in that blue, and local rare species again in the pink. They really connect the statewide data and add to the town's biomap footprint. So 24.5% of Ashby is considered local components. So I thought this was just a great example showing how that connectivity is really enhanced. And then lastly, I just wanted to take a moment and highlight the permanently protected open space layer, which is available on our interactive mapper produced by MassGIS. And it's just a great overlay to have, really helpful for prioritization. And so it can show you where conservation has taken place, where it could occur, and how it intersects with the biomap data. So I'm going to turn it back over to Alec to continue our presentation.
Thanks, Sarah. So now we've gone through the different components of BioMap. We wanted to take a quick step back to just point out the difference between BioMap and another map or data set that you might be familiar with through the Natural Heritage Atlas known as Priority Habitat. So Priority Habitat is codified under the Massachusetts Endangered Species Act and is a regulatory screening tool to allow the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program to review projects or activities for impacts to state-listed species. And this is different from BioMap, which is strictly a non-regulatory and fundamentally a tool to plan and prioritize conservation actions. So we just want to make sure that that distinction is clear, as it is important to know that this is for conservation planning and not regulatory purposes. But they are still available to look, if you're familiar, that's on MassMapper, as well as the BioMap data, so you can see how those overlap. But in terms of BioMap itself, as we said, it's now on a new website, which includes numerous resources for all types of users to understand all the information we've gone over today and more. So these include things such as story maps, which are these interactive web pages that walk you through the information in a really nice way. It includes things like how to use BioMap, which we'll show you in a little bit, as well as just what's new and if you want to review what we went over today. It also includes fact sheets that can help the users understand the data, the methodologies, and the conservation strategies for each component. So if you're someone that wants to know more about that, the fact sheets are going to provide quite a lot of information for you. Also on there, we keep saying this interactive mapper. This is what it looks like. It is a free and accessible map online, and users can customize the data display to meet their interests and needs. So for example, filtering by specific components, maybe you're just trying to look for forested areas or aquatic areas, or at different scales, the local, statewide, or regional. The map also includes an exciting tool that enables users to draw a specific area of interest and derive information and summary statistics for that area. And as with BioMap 2, if you are a GIS user, you can download the data from MassGIS to utilize on your desktop software. And it's also available on MassMapper and ArcGIS Online. But really the value of BioMap is going from understanding the information to implementation on the ground. BioMap supports a wide variety of conservation strategies, and as you can see, BioMap habitats occur in a wide variety of settings. Each will need a specific combination of conservation strategies, and some may need a single approach, and many require multiple actions to achieve conservation success. And one essential such strategy is land protection to stop habitat loss and fragmentation. The updated core habitat and critical natural landscapes, as we said, makes about 2.4 million acres in the state. The map you see there, the highlighted areas in orange, those are the areas that are currently permanently protected open space, and that's about 44% of the BioMap area. And of note, that over the 200,000 acres of land protection that took place in Massachusetts between 2009 and 2022, 62% of which occurred within the bounds of BioMap 2 core and critical natural landscapes. So we really hope that this new iteration of BioMap will continue to focus conservation funding and efforts on these critically important habitats. Although, however, while land protection is essential, it's unfortunately often not enough. Often over 40% of rare and declining species in Massachusetts do require active management of their habitats. And so therefore, habitat restoration and management are key elements of the Commonwealth's BioMap conservation strategy. So BioMap now includes a Habitat Restoration Resource Center, which provides our conservation partners with recommendations and resources for stewardship actions that promote habitat resilience, restore ecological processes, and prepare habitats to recover from and to adapt to climate change. And so this includes guidance to land managers on restoration and management priorities and site planning. Includes fact sheets on information in different upland, wetland, and aquatic habitat types in the state, and on specific practices such as prescribed fire, mowing and mulching, and invasive plant control. Habitat Restoration Resource Center also includes resources for technical assistance and identifies potential funding opportunities if that is something that you're in need of. So there's quite a lot of resources we can show you what that looks like today, but I'm going to pass it back to Sarah to touch on a few more points.
Thanks, Alec. All right. So we just want to take a moment on this slide to talk about the deliberate addition of climate resilience data into BioMap, which is a new innovation for this iteration of BioMap. That was kind of poetic. Anyway, we built the Nature Conservancy's climate resilience data into wetland and forest core and landscape blocks. So the map that we're seeing here in the corner, this is focused on Massachusetts, but the general Nature Conservancy resilience data set covers the entire continental US. So as we're looking at it here, the green areas identify ecosystems and landscapes with diverse topography and habitat connectivity, which allow plants and animals to move to suitable habitat in response to changes in temperature and precipitation. So this data has been incorporated, as I said, into the wetland core, forest core, and landscape blocks. The idea being that these healthy ecosystems, they can absorb floodwaters, store groundwater to mitigate drought, and cool communities during heat waves, just to name a few of those benefits. Similarly, the MassWildlife Fisheries team identified freshwater systems that allow species to persist and thrive in the context of climate change. This includes climate change refugia, rivers that will support cold water fish as water temperatures rise, including the iconic native brook trout. And as with previous versions, the new BioMap will continue to support conservation planning, funding, and collaboration, including from land trusts, state agencies, and municipalities. And the idea being that this will inform and direct millions of conservation dollars each year. We are particularly excited by the emerging opportunities for cities and towns to take advantage of BioMap for their local planning and decision-making, especially with this new local habitat data. We know this takes many different forms, but just a few examples: open space plans and master plans. We've been doing meetings with municipalities. We've started doing that, and we've seen, just a great reception. People are happy to have it. And as we know, the best conservation projects are collaborations among multiple organizations, agencies, and communities. And we see BioMap as being a key tool in bringing people together to foster these robust partnerships. And for the home stretch of our slides, I'll hand it back to Alec.
So BioMap really envisions a future in which the people of the Commonwealth invest in the strategic protection and stewardship of the lands and waters that are most important for conserving biodiversity. In this future, these vital natural systems continue to protect us against the damaging effects of climate change, and they continue to provide clean air, clean water, employment opportunities, and beautiful spaces for recreation. And they continue to ensure that all Massachusetts residents have access to nature and enjoy the benefits of our rich natural heritage. And with BioMap, we can protect our extraordinary biodiversity and vibrant quality of life now and for future generations. And so we'd be remiss without saying that this really was a large team effort from many names that you see here, as well as financial support from Executive Office of Energy, Environmental Affairs, the Department of Fish and Game, MassWildlife, Nature Conservancy, and numerous donors. And as you see, just a whole big list of names and multiple organizations here. So we're just so grateful for all their work and want to thank them. But that is, this is the new BioMap, and welcome to it. The direct link here, the short link you see here, will bring you to that homepage. We really want to make it as useful as possible to as many people as possible. So Sarah and I, our position here is doing these types of presentations, as well as doing technical assistance and providing any feedback with questions or as you're working through utilizing the data. You may have noticed it is called BioMap and not BioMap 3, and that is because it is now, we're considering a living product, and which will be allowing us to add more content easily over time. So a much more dynamic online resource in this way. So we know that was a bit of information. We're going to take a quick break to see if there's any questions before we take a look at the website and the interactive mapper. So I'm going to pause for 1 second. And if anyone has a quick question about all that information, we can take a second to answer.
You anticipated my question about why not BioMap 3, so thank you with that. You had mentioned or referenced Mass Mapper, and perhaps Alec, you could just speak on that.
Sure. Yeah. So MassMapper is the Mass GIS or the state GIS mapping system. So it's online. It's on MassMapper website, and it includes all the data sets for the entire state that are run by Mass GIS. So all of these data sets are available in MassMapper. So if you're someone that is utilizing that for looking at other GIS data, you can continue to use this on use the BioMap data on MassMapper. We have our own interactive mapper that has some differences, and we can talk about that today, just in looking at why you might use one or the other. But there are just a couple options that you can see this data in different ways.
Cheryl Rosoff here. Can I leap in with a question?
Please.
Oh, okay. I'm involved with the local agricultural commission. And one of the things that has always intrigued me is identification of critical habitat on our farms. And I don't know if you have location of farms on your maps and where there's just sort of an assumption going on, but maybe you'd speak to whatever relationship there might be then between the farming community, ag, and conservation.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question.
It's also the first time we've been asked that question, so I think, well, I can start by saying there's no layer on BioMap explicitly designating the location of agricultural pieces of land, such as a farm. I have noticed in my work with the map that sometimes farms, like especially, smaller local farms, I've seen them identified as local landscapes because those are identifying intact areas. But that's just in my experience in the towns that I can think of off the top of my head. So yeah, I guess the short answer is there's no specific layer of data identifying agriculture. I think, yeah, Alec, looks like you unmuted, so I'll let you have a chance.
Yeah, sorry, we are in our office, so there's a little bit of cross background noise here, so I just don't want to overload everybody. But yeah, to Sarah's point, yeah, there is no direct layered about agricultural built in there, but the rare species cores and where those are identified, that comes from our Heritage Hub, or the Natural Heritage Endangered Species Program. So people submitting information from there. and then our biologists do review the data and look at the area. So they are incorporating things like aerial imagery, and that might come up in that analysis and looking at the boundaries of where that rare species core would be, as well as the permanently protected open space. If it is an APR, an agricultural preservation area, that'll be visible in that open space layer. So there's ways that you can identify some of these areas depending on it, but not singling out based on agriculture in that way.
And I know there's a lot of questions coming in, but I don't want to focus just on one, but I do want to just add, I think everything Alex and Sarah said is absolutely correct. As you know, I mean, a farm can include multiple types of land use. So there could be row crops, there could be pasture, there could be woodlands. So that those woodlands, those pastures can be part of many of the components of BioMap. For instance, the landscape blocks are mosaics of, as Sarah said, big forest, rivers, wetlands, pastures, even power line rights of way. So there's that mosaic of the land that could include parts of farmlands. Some of the models exclude intensive agriculture like tilled row crops, but those may be part of a rare species habitat because some rare species prefer kind of disturbed soils or disturbed habitats. So I think farms will show up in many different ways within the biomap, and it's probably a case-by-case basis, as is most of the landscape, where rare species are occurring, where intact large landscapes are occurring. So I don't know if that's helpful, but just as Sarah said, there's no deliberate inclusion of agricultural lands, but a lot of agricultural lands will have important habitat values.
Thank you.
As Andy alluded to, there are quite a few questions. Do you guys want to hold on to those questions till the end?
We can answer the first two, and then maybe we can show you with the third one there, Chris, about the difference between the maps. Maybe that would work.
So I was part of the Resilient Lands Initiative, drawing that up early. I was part of the committee, which kind of formed right as COVID was arriving. I haven't checked the final documents recently. I have a hunch BioMap is mentioned within the Resilient Lands Initiative, but in terms of kind of a direct link, I'm not sure that's in there, but I'm open to hearing if Edward, you're more familiar with it than me, if there's a nuance to that question that I could shed light on. I'm sure there's a link, but I don't know how strong it is.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I saw the announcement and I downloaded the document. And since that happened with the new administration, there has not been any news or status update on. I was wondering if maybe you knew, and how does that relate to the biomap?
I think they're going to be tightly linked, but I think the initiative is kind of, the whole administration is really getting their feet under them. So there's a lot of things that carried over from the previous administration that are still yet to be kind of fully fleshed out. That's my perspective. So I think there's a TBD there. Sorry, it's unsatisfying.
You think it's still moving forward though?
Yeah. There's no indication.
Oh, that's great. Because that looked very good.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you.
Sure.
Andy, do you also want to, you have a great response with the state versus local data sets there. Do you want to address that, or I'm happy to?
Yeah, I'll jump in, and you complimented Alec. Let me see it. So, statewide habitats are assessed from the perspective of the state, of the entire state. So if you look for the largest forests, it's going to naturally take you to Western Mass, to some degree the area you all are sitting in, Worcester Plateau, especially the northern and central Worcester Plateau, with less so in other parts of the state. So it's really a statewide perspective. And in BioMap 2, we stopped there. So, and the same was true for wetlands and for other components, rivers. So in BioMap 2, we stopped there. And then over the years, we heard quite a bit of feedback that, yeah, BioMap is great, but in my town, it doesn't really give us much information. So we said, let's complement that statewide perspective. And I will say that even with the statewide perspective, we did our best to stratify that across the state. So we still look for the largest forests in the Connecticut River Valley and Eastern Massachusetts and the Cape, but still there's a bias toward certain places. So anyway, to make a long story short, we really wanted to provide resources to every city and town. Statewide data covers that in many cases, but it often really leaves some towns out. So we basically did a mini biomap for each city and town. I mean, that's an oversimplification, but that's what the local data are. So it's looking at the same concepts. Where's the biggest natural areas? Where are the best wetlands, the most intact forests, and giving the town that information just for that town, as if the whole universe was just within the boundaries of that town. So that's similar concepts, but scaled from first the statewide perspective and then the local perspective. Alec, anything to add to that?
Oh, that's perfect. That's why I asked you.
Great. Hope that's helpful.
So why don't we skip questions and get back to your presentation?
Yes, that sounds good. And I will share my screen to give a short walkthrough of our sites and using the map. Okay. How's that look? Hopefully that looks good. All right. Speak up if it's not, because I can no longer see anybody.
You're good.
Okay, great. This is the home page. So if you go to mass.gov/biomap, as we saw on that last slide, this is where it will take you. And this is really the control center, I guess, if you want to access all of the resources associated with BioMap, they're all here. When you first start scrolling down, you'll see there's a suite of resources. Some of these are what we call story maps, which are a dynamic web page format, which uses images and moves in a way that presents the information in a really dynamic way. We like to highlight those and encourage people to use those. So a lot of the information that we covered in this presentation is on these. So if you wanted a refresher, or if maybe there's somebody who wants to catch up on the information, we have a story map on what is BioMap and how to use BioMap. There's also story maps for the BioMap components. And I can show that page in just a minute. And what's new, this page has a great story map on the climate resilience data, as well as the information about what's happened between BioMap 2 and this new version. As we keep scrolling, the interactive map itself is here. You can use it as it exists on this page, or you can open it in a separate tab. We have this view full screen map. It's also up here on the top menu bar. And then at the bottom, a few things to point out: the data downloads and resources tab. So if you're somebody who wants to use BioMap data on your ArcGIS desktop software, and you want to download it as a geodatabase or a shapefile, you can do that here. We have a technical report that's in development. So if you're somebody who really likes the nuts and bolts, keep your eyes peeled, because it will be up soon. And then also down here, we have this Connect with Us page, and feedback is a really big part of what we're doing with BioMap Outreach. We want to hear from folks how they're using BioMap, what their experience has been, and of course, any questions. So if you go to this page, there's the natural heritage email, and you can write any questions to that email. Alec and I monitor that inbox and we'll get back to you. There's also a survey where you can fill out about your experience, and we monitor that survey as well. So as I continue through the site, I'll show a few of the pages. We have the components page. So this is the information we talked about: core habitat, critical natural landscape, and those components like rare species and aquatic core, landscape blocks. And there are story maps for each of these. So you can find those here, as well as fact sheets. So if you want to just jump right to one of the particular components, you can find information like summary, statistics, and methodologies on these pages. So we really encourage you to take a look at those. And on the Habitat Restoration Resource Center, there's a plethora of resources to dig into. We have story map again on why habitat restoration and management are essential. Great introduction to these concepts. The habitat and management recommendations page breaks the habitats in the state into the categories of upland, wetland, and aquatic habitats. And you can take a look at fact sheets like we saw for the components, but for those habitats as well. Management, priorities, and planning. This is a great place to start if you're looking to create a management plan. Lots of really helpful information. And the restoration and management practices page, similarly, lots of great information that you can look into. Here at the bottom, for those interested in technical support and learning about potential funding opportunities that BioMap is connected to, that's your place to go. But I will now jump into the map, which, as we said, we can click here. And this is the map. I'll take it to our default view. So when you go to the interactive map, excuse me, this is what you first see. You have your typical zoom in and zoom out up here in this top left corner. The home button takes us to this default extent, as well as the My Location button. So if you're somebody who might be out in the field, and I will mention at this point that BioMap is compatible on mobile devices as well. So potentially you're in your backyard or you're out in the field and you'd like to know what BioMap data is around, you can click My Location. And because we're in the Westboro office, I'll give it a try. Yep, there we go. And it sometimes takes a minute, but the BioMap data that's around you will load and you can see what's going on. I think because of the loading time, I'm just gonna take us back to the default view and continue walking through. Here we can see the base map gallery. This allows you to change the background of the map. So especially for someone who's interested in land use, we have a couple of options using aerial imagery. For example, this imagery with labels one, as you can see, changes the background to an aerial image. Graphic, and then back to where we were, the gray canvas one. Here in the center, this is the data panel. So this allows you to select and deselect whatever data you might be interested in. So I'm going to use the address bar. So you can type an address, a town, even latitude and longitude. I'm going to go with Bolton because I know that's in your watershed. Zoom in there. As we can see, it takes us to the town. And you can select and deselect data. So as we saw, I just selected the BioMap elements, and this turned on the elements because the state overview layer is just for when you're zoomed out. So some of these layers are scale dependent. We see that as well with the assessor's parcels and the local data. So I'll just take this as a moment to note that if you have selected data and it is not appearing, make sure you're at the right scale. So I have the elements selected. I can drop down this menu with this little arrow on the side. So if you want to just look at core habitat or critical natural landscape, but you can also look in components view. So I can turn on the components. As we can see, the legend will automatically update. And you can select or deselect individual elements of these components. Now you may be wondering why we're not seeing that on the map, and that's because the elements is above the components. The order on the data panel is determines the order on the map. So we can see the elements are above core habitat and critical natural landscape components. So if I were to deselect that, it now reveals the components which were underneath. So the great part about the BioMap interactive mapper, and I know we had a question about the differences with MassMapper and BioMap. One thing that this mapper has that MassMapper does not provide is that if you were to click on a polygon, it will provide a pop-up window that describes what you've clicked on. So as I can see, I've clicked on a vernal pool core. It gives me a description, but there's also another polygon here layered, and that's why it says 1 of 2. So if I tab through, I can see there's also rare species core. So that's a great feature. I can turn on the local. So that has added in a nice amount over here. Looks like we got some local landscapes. Right here, maybe some local wetlands. And then regional as well, depending on where you are. Looks like maybe some regional rare species up here with that pink crosshatch. I will go back to the elements view just for the sake of everyone's eyes. And I think my map pane may be a little narrow because of the monitor I'm using. So I just collapsed the legend and hopefully that provides some extra visibility of Bolton. The permanently protected open space layer is something we mentioned during the presentation. That's produced by MassGIS, but you can use it here. And the same functionality provides that pop-up window, gives you a little bit more information. The last aspect of the BioMap Interactive Mapper, and another thing that makes it unique from MassMapper, is the summary report tool, which is this last widget right here. And this allows you to draw a report for an area of interest. So this could be a town or something, a place you draw freehand, or a parcel from the assessor's parcels layer. And I can give a quick example of each of those options. So if you were to type in, stick with Bolton here, and click report, it may take a minute to run. So we do encourage patience depending on your Wi-Fi connection and the server. But when it's done, this print button will become bold and you can click it. You can choose what layout works best for you. So portrait is just your standard 8x11. And I preloaded one, as we can see here. But whatever layers that you have selected, when you create the map, it takes essentially a snapshot of that. So as I had the elements and the local layers on, that's what we see in the view. It provides you a legend and scale bar. Oh, I'll mention you can change the title. So I added in Bolton here. You can also create a caption, and then it provides the summary report statistics. So we can see each of the elements and then the components. It provides the number of polygons and their respective acreages. And then it breaks it down into each one individually and provides a table. We often get the question what these numbers signify. They are just an organizational tool, but I can show you a nifty trick. If you go back to your summary report tool and you expand this menu here, you can see core habitat number 2152. If you want to know what particular polygon that is, you can click on it and it will highlight it. So that's a great tip for those who are trying to get a little bit more info there. So that is for the town of Bolton, but I will also show the other aspect of the summary report tool. If I click start over, we can do kind of a refresh, and then I'll go to draw, and there's two different options. You can freehand draw a polygon. So I'll just zoom in for a moment. So it says click to start drawing. I'm just going to do something freehand. Nice square. Double click to complete. And if I click report, it will run a report on just that area I've drawn. But for those of us who may not be great at drawing, especially if you have a funky parcel, I will note that we have the select by rectangle tool. So to show that, I'm going to click start over, activate that assessor's parcels layer, which is another scale dependent one. So you've got to be pretty zoomed in to see it. Let's take a look. I'm going to turn off permanently protected open space. If I go to select by rectangle, this one's for the parcels, you can essentially draw a box that will highlight a certain group of parcels. So say those were your parcels of interest. And just like before, you can create a report. So we can see, highlights that area on the map and provides the same statistics, summary information, but just for that area of parcels that you've highlighted. You can add parcels. If you click this button again, I'm going to hold the shift button. There we go. It sometimes does that thing, but you can add parcels as well. I'm not sure if that worked actually, but click, shift, add parcels. There we go. Now I've added some parcels. So that was a quick walkthrough of all the features that we have on the BioMap Interactive Mapper. I think we'll take another pause. It looks like it's a great time to stop and have our discussion. I'm going to stop sharing the screen, but if anyone has a question, I'm happy to reshare it and we can go back to the map.
So utterly impressive. Can't imagine how much work has gone into this. Again, Sarah, you anticipated a question I had at what level you needed to zoom in order for the assessor's data to show up, and I assume just keep on zooming in until that shows up is the answer there. So the way we can handle the 10 minutes or so, 8 minutes of Q&A that we have is either for me to pick things out of the chat or for people just to unmute and ask themselves. John Brush had asked, how is the data determined for type and location on the map? Right.
I can take a stab at that one, and I'll try to be brief because I could go on. Each of those colors on the map represents a different habitat type, the colors that Sarah was showing. And each of the different component types represented by those colors is a different data set with a different methodology. So I'll just give two examples, just as examples. So the rare species data are data that are collected in the field by trained botanists, zoologists, herpetologists, et cetera, where they're looking at the habitat, finding the species, assessing the population, documenting that, and mapping that. Those data then go into the rare species data set. In contrast, something like the wetland core data is a model of data. So we use the DEP wetlands and we assess each wetland in the state for its ecological integrity. How is it bisected by roads? Is it encroached upon by development? Or is it in a natural setting with a lot of connectivity to the surrounding landscape? So we use different thresholds for the different data sets. For instance, for those wetland data, we use thresholds to pick the most resilient, highest integrity wetlands across the state to put into BioMap. So there's a different methodology for each of the different habitat types. If you want to just taste a really quick thumbnail of those methods, the fact sheets that Alec and Sarah showed you on the website give a really quick thumbnail of the methods for each of the habitat types or components of BioMap.
Great. Here is a question about, does the map outline watersheds boundaries, or that would be HUC 12s or HUC 10s?
It does not include watershed boundaries. So that would be for those who are looking. So the other layers, the assessor's parcels and the permanently protected layers, those are examples of layers that you can add into MassMapper. And so the HUC 12 or HUC 10 would be, you could view that on MassMapper. So if you wanted to see the overlay of BioMap data and, for instance, watersheds, I would say go to MassMapper, and I can put the link in the chat here for those who aren't familiar. But it doesn't include it in our mapper.
That'd be great. That was one question, was the contrast between BioMap and MassMapper. I think what we're indicating is that MassMapper actually does have more data layers.
Yeah, and that's just there's a lot of examples and or different ways to utilize it. You can also use it on ArcGIS Online for free if you're someone that utilizes it there. So it just depends on the what your preference is and what you're trying to view.
And there is a question, one second, Jen, there's a question about how often are rare species data updated. I assume not as every report comes in, but given that you indicated this is an iterative, ongoing living document, at some point you'll get around to it.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate, I would say. It was just this new iteration was just released 6 months ago. So we've been mostly focused on getting the word out about that. There will be updates, but we don't have a timeline set out for that at the moment.
And I will also just say with the rare species data, it goes through the Heritage Hub, who then we have a whole team of reviewers who then verify the information and then create that GIS version of it and then publish it to the online. So there's a bit of a delay with that process. And then for BioMap, after there's a significant change to that data set, then we'll look at updating the full statewide data. So it'll be a little bit of time with that, but it's still, the process is still the same and going through the Heritage Hub and then all the way to BioMap.
Excellent. Did I see, Jen, that your hand was up?
I did. I had a quick question. Thanks, Al. For the assessor information that's on there, how detailed is that? Once you keep clicking on that particular parcel or a couple of parcels that you're interested in, is there just like the plat number or is there ownership information? How detailed does it get?
So it's the same level 3 assessors parcels that you would find on MassMapper or MassGIS. So it just like, I guess we didn't show that pop-up window. It has all the attribute information for each of those parcels.
Okay, awesome.
It's very detailed, book and page, you name it.
Wow, that's terrific. Thanks.
And as those are updated through MassGIS, it'll be pushed to us and then we'll update our map. So if you're submitting updates to assessors parcels or protected open space, as those are updated, we'll update our layers as well.
Okay. Terrific. Thank you.
And there's a question, perhaps it'll be the last question. What is the priority natural communities core on BioMap?
I can jump on that one. So in addition to rare species data, the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program maps, especially the more uncommon rare natural community types like sandplain grasslands or coastal plain pond shores, calcareous wetlands, certain ridge tops and cliff communities. So those unique and sometimes rare natural systems or ecosystems or communities are mapped just like rare species. Ecologist outlines them on the map, and that's filters its way into the best occurrences of those, filter their way into that data layer in BioMap.
So
I also saw one other question from Richard about New Hampshire. And this is just to address, this is strictly in the boundaries of Massachusetts. And just looking at it from our perspective, New Hampshire, to our knowledge, doesn't have a version of BioMap like this. They do have different GIS data sets that go into a lot of this information, as well as the Nature Conservancy has a lot of data sets on natural communities and at the national scale as well. So although they may not have an exact version like this, they do have a lot of information, and their heritage program and Granite, it's still called Granite, is the GIS clearinghouse that has all that information.
great. And Alec, thanks for putting up the MassMapper link. I want to thank Sarah, Alec, and Andy for a tremendous program. It was really informative. I'm so happy that you were able to join us today. And I know that you're available generally if people want to reach out to you. So thank you again. I would indicate that we'll probably do another program in June, focusing on climate change and permaculture, perhaps with a New Hampshire focus. We'll keep you posted, and otherwise this has been recorded, so there should be a link sent out to everybody who registered if you want to see it again or share that. So once again, thanks. Have a good night.